time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, by George, I think he's got it. Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George. That's how we always start the show, and we've got kind of a different one today. I do these shows. Some of them I almost have to because of the political stuff that's going on. It's very unseemly. My God, I don't like talking about politics. I hate talking about war. Then I got shows that I want to do, and this is one of them, folks. We got a returnee coming on that I really like. It's Captain John Cox. I really enjoy these. We deal with aviation. We talk a little bit about some disasters that have occurred, but also safety issues. And we're going to be talking to him very shortly. So stand by on that. Captain Cox is on deck, as they say. But I want to do a little house cleaning here, a little housekeeping. I want to do some political stuff to start with, just a couple of minutes, because this is what's going on and it's extremely important. And again, you get a perspective on Podcast by George you don't get everybody else giving you. So this is from the Associated Press. A Biden special counsel deepens the Justice Department and political fray. In naming a special counsel to investigate the presence of classified documents at President Joe Biden's Delaware home and former office, Attorney General Merrick Garland described the appointment as underscoring the Justice Department's commitment to independence and accountability in particularly sensitive investigations. My highlighting here, if those words sounded familiar, they should. Yeah. Garland used identical phrasing in November in appointing a different special counsel for a different politically explosive investigation into different classified documents for a different political figure. This one into the retention of top secret records at former President Donald Trump's Florida estate, Mar-a-Lago. And the take that I have on this, the spin that's a little bit different, a lot of the coverage that you're seeing is about how this may adversely impact the Trump investigation, which may be more serious, maybe. I mean, that's yet to be determined and may warrant additional scrutiny. But the thing about this is, when they first reported on these records in Biden's squirreled away closet and maybe his some other places, his office, they were supposedly dealing with Iran, Ukraine, and the UK. Okay, what's significant about that? Well, Iran, we're trying to get that nuclear treaty back in place with Iran. We've been unable to do it. Of course, Iran has enemies in the Middle East that are our friends. What the hell is the deal with Iran? Why do these documents deal with that? Ukraine. Whoa, wait a minute. The United States and its agencies were involved in that 2014 coup that instilled the current government and was a precursor to the war that began. And why are the documents dealing with Ukraine? Is that accurate? Is that what they're dealing with? And of course, Biden got that $60,000 a month job with that Ukrainian gas company, and they've been looking at that for a long time. Does it have anything to do with those things? And of course, the U.S. proxy war in Ukraine. Do those files involving the UK have anything to do with that? Because that's always our primary ally when it comes to war. And of course, UK continues to imprison Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks guy that was revealing all kinds of stuff about wars involving the United States and the UK. That's yet to be seen. So very quickly here, a couple of other things in the news past couple of weeks. Jeff Beck. Oh my God, does that make a guy like me? I mean, you sense your own mortality when you see your heroes pass by. And then just here yesterday, Lisa Marie Presley, and again for my generation and people that love Elvis and that type of thing. I love Lisa Marie. She was great. My daughter, big fan, saw her live and in person. So, those are a couple of things, and we may get to those in upcoming episodes of Podcast by George. But let's take this down and get to our guest here now. Bring this back up on screen and introduce Captain John Cox. He's a veteran major airline corporate and general aviation pilot. He's flown over 14,000 hours, over 10,000 in command of jet airliners. He's flown as an instructor, a check pilot, and test pilot. In addition to his extensive involvement in global air safety, Captain Cox authors the Ask the Captain column for USA Today, which I've read for years. We're going to have one of those up here in a little bit. And he serves as has served as the aviation analyst for NBC News and provides expertise to numerous other media outlets, including Podcasts by George. He frequently appears on Air Disasters, Why Planes Crash. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Safety Operating Systems in Washington, D.C. That's his serious job, as I like to say. So let's bring this up. Let's get serious here because we've got some serious things to talk about today and bring him on screen. Good morning, Captain.
Good morning, George. Glad to be
bearing with me there through that political stuff because I didn't want to get you involved in that because you're not about politics. You're about aviation. And we've had lots of aviation news here in the past month or so, and most of it hasn't been good, folks. Let me bring this up on screen, Captain, and have you talk about this a little bit because this was just a couple of days ago. This was this week, this NOTAM thing, this NOTAM thing. Let me see what... This comes out of Dallas of the AP. Until Wednesday, few travelers had ever heard of a notice to air missions or NOTAM, nor did they know that the system used to generate those notices could cause widespread travel misery. And it did. As they arrived at airports in the morning, they quickly found out, okay, this thing's been around for a while. You and I have both been around for a while. This was, I think, when you were flying airliners, a part of what you were using. Tell us about it.
Well, the NOTAM system goes back probably into the 50s or maybe even before then. It's been around ever since I've been in aviation, and that's 53 years. It is a way that unusual things at airports, that information gets broadcast to pilots. Things such as a runway closure, a taxiway that's being worked on for maintenance and is closed, a radio navigation aid that is down for maintenance or unusable, airspace restrictions such as a space launch on the Florida coast or at Vandenberg in California. All of those things are provided to the pilot prior to departure via the NOTAM system. And for airliners, it is a requirement that they have this information prior to departure. It's part of what they call their operating specifications. And before they leave, either via like an iPad or historically, just reams of paper with all of these NOTAMs. These NOTAMs are very cryptic, and they're in a code that goes back many, many, many years, decades. But pilots are trained how to read them, and as are flight dispatchers. So you have to have this before you can push off the gate. And while there is a backup system to this is an older technology, but it's been very reliable. In all the time I've been flying, I've never seen the NOTAM system go down before this week. So there's been a lot of people saying, well, it should be updated, but let's be careful before we start updating things that we get as much reliability out of it as we've had for the last 50 plus years. So it was very disruptive. The FAA properly and conservatively said, we can't get this information out to you. We don't know that you're getting all of it. So for about 3 hours, they just said, just stay where you are. Well, the consequence of that is once they release the airplanes, you've got hundreds of thousands of airplanes wanting to release and come off the gate at the same time. The airspace system can't handle that. So they had to be metered, and that resulted in ongoing delays all through yesterday and the day before when it actually occurred. Yeah. So it takes a couple of days for the system to reabsorb that level of disruption. But the good news is by last evening, all of the flights were operating pretty much on schedule and normally. And for the most part, in most parts of the country, the weather's been pretty good, and that's helped as well.
Okay, good. Let's see here. I'll read this. It's a lot of what you just covered, but the Federal Aviation Administration computer system that compiles and distributes essential safety information for pilots went kaput. Yeah, we know that. That temporarily grounded all flights nationwide, touched off a cascading air traffic jam, this daisy chain that you talk about all the time that takes at least a day to unclog. More than 1,300 flights were canceled, 9,000 delayed by early evening on the East Coast because of the outage, according to the flight tracking website FlightAware, which we reference once in a while on this show. And And as a captain mentioned, the system's been around for more than a half century, and it has evolved from paper to computers. It's in the process of being updated. Okay, and this goes on to this. So this NOTAM thing, the question I had, this isn't something, Captain, where any pilot would just say, "I don't need that. I'm taking off without it." You got to have
Well,
this, right?
certainly for an airliner, it's absolutely essential. But a couple of friends of mine that were flying small airplanes locally were able to call their destination airport and say, "Okay, tell me about your NOTAMs," and they wrote them down via a phone call. And they were flying under visual flight rules, and they were able to depart, fly the flight. But these are recreational pilots, so it's not as though an airliner. No, you're gonna wait for the formal and complete NOTAM list before you push off the gate.
Okay, so here's what went wrong with the system. It was a computer thing, and you mentioned we've got to be very careful about updating or correcting any of this. Now, the government and their response, and I'm thinking about this infrastructure bill, which didn't turn out to be what they intended it to be. But is there money for this thing? Are there any plans to update this with what is currently been legislated? Is this in the works or not?
It is in the works. There's been a plan for a system-wide information distribution system within FAA, and that's been in place for a while. They know that they need to update it, and the process, the contracts are being let to do that. But I want to be careful about saying, well, we need the latest and greatest technology for this system. When you look at things like Amazon, when you look at things like Facebook or Meta, when you look at any of these high-tech companies, they too have had outages. So just because the new technology is easier to use, is less cryptic, all of that's wonderful. But let's make sure the reliability is there, because 50 years without a failure is a pretty good track record.
Okay, so talk about that a little bit. I got to ask you, we're going to talk about Southwest. We're going to talk about some other issues. You've been at this a long time. Um, Back in the 80s and 90s, you had a lot of the worst air crashes possible. Now we're free of those by and large. We don't have them near at the rate that we used to, but we've got all these service issues that have been cascading and becoming more apparent here in just recent years. Is this the way of the future, or is this stuff going to get sorted out, or are we always going to have a snarl problem when it comes to air travel in this country?
Well, I think there's a couple of pieces to that. One, we're always going to have weather-induced problems. If you have a blizzard in the Northeast, it's going to impact some of the most densely traveled airspace in the world, and it takes days and days to recover from that. We're better at it than we were in the 60s and 70s and 80s, but it still takes days to be able to get the airplanes either away from the storm or into the airports and start picking up the pieces and the passengers and the freight to get them where they need to be in a timely manner. So weather-induced problems, we're going to continue to have them. As far as system reliability, and what bit Southwest so hard was the fact that they had so many airplanes out of position, and they're trying to fly what they can, that they overloaded an antiquated software system. And that the failure of Southwest to have previously invested in a more up-to-date, robust, and capable crew scheduling, aircraft scheduling software, that's what came home and bit them very hard. Other airlines had made that investment, but I think the message was loud and clear, reading from what the executive leadership team at Southwest has said. They know that they now need to make that investment, and they're going to do so in a timely manner. So I think the repercussions of a disruption like Southwest experienced is a main driver for them to continue to invest. So I think they'll be better at that. But the weather disruptions, we're not going to change that. And if anything, you're seeing like the cascades of storms that are coming into California. Yeah. Those are not likely to change as climate change occurs, and we see more and more of these types of storms, hurricanes, widespread areas. So airlines can operate pretty well in a lot of weather conditions, but there's some that exceed the safety limits that you can't. And so then you have to start rebuilding the system, and it takes days.
Well, thanks for mentioning climate change, climate catastrophe, as we refer to it on my show. It is leading the big three: climate, war, and healthcare. It affects everything, and it affects aviation mightily. Let me read this out here, the end of this article, because this will take us to this Southwest Airlines thing. And ask the captain. I want to get to one of those two that deals with this. Could this happen again? Not clear. Congress already was going to look into aviation technology after Southwest Airlines' crew scheduling system went haywire during the holidays, leading to nearly 17,000 canceled flights in the last 10 days of December. Now the system that sends NOTAMs with backup systems will be part of the inquiry. This is a quote now, we will be looking into what caused this outage and how redundancy plays a role in preventing future outages. Senator Maria Cantwell, chair of the Senate Transportation Committee, said in a statement, the public needs a resilient air transportation system. Hear, hear. Well, okay, so that's the situation with NOTAMs. We got a lot of things to talk about today. I want to get to this next one here because this is what I'm calling the captain's crystal ball. You authored this. This appeared in the USA Today on December 21st, right before Christmas. And it says, why are flights delayed or canceled when there's a weather disruption? Ask the captain. And you penned that winter has officially started, and frequent flyers know that means a higher chance of irregular operations for airlines, whether it's a major winter storm or localized weather conditions like these storms that afflicted the Southeast just last night, folks. The effects on flights can be significant and sometimes have a ripple effect on the system. Flight crews dread irregular operations as much or more as passengers do. So, Captain, jump in here. This deserves reinforcement. People don't understand this. When you get frustrated, hopefully you don't get angry, but when you're upset about not being able to get where you want to go and not be on time and not be on schedule and those types of things, those professionals that are operating these flights are in the same boat as you are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is very challenging when you depart your home base and you expect to be out for 3 days, 4 days, whatever it is. And weather disruptions occur and you end up in irregular operations, and you're not going to get home. You're not going to get home on schedule. You're not going to get home on the same day. The trips that you had planned to fly, all of that's out the window. You don't know where you're going to be flying to, and how they're going to make sure that the airplane's there. I mean, in worst case scenarios, I've been told to go to the airport to fly a flight only to find that there was no airplane there. And so this is the kind of things that irregular operations, people don't often appreciate. I call it a symphony of motion of how many things have to come together for the airplane to be there, for the maintenance to be right and proper on that airplane, for the flight crew to be there, for the flight dispatcher to have made arrangements for the flight plan to be in the right hands, the airspace, the fuel load be addressed, and so that the proper fuel's on the airplane, the proper freight and luggage is on the airplane. That all has to happen before it pushes off the gate. And the gates are typically what I'll call choke points for the airline. So you're constantly airplanes going on and off of the gate. If you have one that doesn't show up, now you've got to deal with all that freight, all that luggage that was supposed to have left and didn't. Oh, by the way, there's 150 passengers that were supposed to leave and didn't. So you have this cascading effect until such time as you bring in additional flights and you begin to meter those passengers and freight and luggage onto the airplanes that are there. And so you work your way through this bottleneck. But it's the efforts of hundreds and hundreds of people behind the scenes that are making all of this work. And the flight crews, I remember very clearly, we had a major winter storm in the Northeast, and I was trapped in a hotel, and I couldn't get through to crew scheduling. This was really before the days of iPads, but you'd call and call and call, and the call wouldn't go through. So I set an alarm at 2 a.m, woke up, and finally got through, only to be told that my flight the next morning was not going to happen, and they'd call me back. And a day later, they did. So it's very frustrating for the flight crews. I mean, we have families as well we're very sympathetic to the passengers. We understand the frustration. And I mean, I've had more than one passenger come up and say, you have to fix this. Well, I'm a line captain. I can't really do that. I don't have that capability. I can talk to my flight dispatcher and say, can we put a trip together? Sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But it's important for passengers to understand we're under the same difficulty and we have the same goal as you do. We want you where you want to go. We want us where we were scheduled to go. And we want to work that out. But there are days when it's remarkably difficult.
Got to tell you, we're talking about aviation. And of course, we were talking about politics earlier. Professional wrestling. Let me bring this in. I used to be a crime reporter and on police and fire calls and that type of thing. I go down in the morning every morning to the police station and talk to the sergeant down there on the look at the blotter and that type of thing. And he told me, he said, off duty, George, he says, I provide security at the professional wrestling matches. You do? He says, yeah. He says, you won't believe that. He says, I had a guy last night come up to me and demand that I arrest one of those guys in the ring for assault. And he said the guy was dead serious. It reminds me of those people coming up because the airport's closing down and wanting you to fix it as a pilot. It's like, what the hell are you? Are you kidding me? I mean, I think you're barking up the wrong tree, pal. But that's what this guy said. Oh, yeah, dead serious. And that kind of reminds me of politics again. But let me read this article out because this was great. Now, and again, I don't know if you had a crystal ball out or if it's just the prospect of weather or whatever, but you say now that we're in the winter season, important to remember that hundreds of experienced professionals are working to solve the many issues. If you learn of a possible storm affecting your flight or receive an email with a modified itinerary, realize those decisions were not made lightly and probably one of your best options. One last consideration. Now, this is something that I used to do back in the day. You hop on the cell phone right away and you call the airline, but those lines get quickly clogged. Try email or the chat feature on the airline's websites. That might get you answers quicker. No one likes seeing travel plans disrupted. After watching the airlines cope with various storms over many decades, it makes me appreciate the professionals in the operations control centers around the country for keeping us flying. I mean, that's great. And again, it was very timely and you had a little bit of a premonition there, I think. But let me ask you about the situation with these NOTAMs and Midwest or Southwest Airlines. I look like the Southwest Airlines meltdown and think, man, that's as bad as it can get. I mean, it's just onward from here and upward, hopefully. But could this get worse? These snarls, could this situation with Southwest have been even worse, or was that as bad as it could get?
It was pretty bad. They had a limited ability to be able to get some scheduling done. I guess the worst case would have been if they were back to pen and paper, which I think they were in some cases. For Southwest, it was probably a pretty grim experience that they'll remember a long time. I don't know that it could get much worse unless you had multiple problems with multiple airlines in a same geographic area. Like if you lose the entire Northeast and it's a major blizzard and it goes for days, every airline's going to be affected and the airport's going to have to clear all that snow and everything else. And so in that respect, it could have been worse because it only affected one airline. And to that degree, everybody canceled with some during that storm. But the meltdown was really unique to Southwest. If you have a once in a century type blizzard and it goes for days and it's slow moving, you're going to affect 5, 6, 8 airlines. It's going to be catastrophic and it's going to take longer to recover. And so the only thing is those blizzards and things, they tend to be limited to a specific geographic region. The Southwest case, it actually bogged their entire system down.
Yeah. All right, good. We got to keep moving here. I do have let me bring this up, but we're going to talk about Midwest 5481 out of Charlotte. It had a 20-year anniversary. The captain has done shows on that. He's very knowledgeable about it. Southwest flight cancellations meltdown may not be the best last for any airline, experts say. Southwest may be back on track for now, only a matter of time before another airline and its travelers experience similar chaos. That's what we're talking about. All right, so let me ask you about this. And we have talked about this a little bit. Why is it always Southwest? It kind of reminds me of the Perfect Storm movie when those uh, fishermen went out there and the Coast Guard. It says it's always you guys. I mean, why is it? What is it with you? Why are you always in the eye of the storm? What is it with Southwest that keeps them on the front pages of the newspapers so much, Captain?
Well, I'm not sure it's particularly a Southwest issue beyond their crew scheduling problem that we've discussed. I mean, initially it it hit all the airlines, but the Southwest route structure is a little unique in that they do hub flying, meaning that they bring airplanes into a central hub, exchange passengers, luggage, and freight, and then send them out. But they do a lot of point to point flying. And so that makes it much harder for them to reassemble the system because they don't have airplanes that are scheduled to pick up those excess passengers like a hub system would. So the fact that Southwest flies to a lot of medium-sized cities point to point, it actually, in this case, it came back to exacerbate their problems. So I wouldn't say that it's always Southwest. I will say categorically they're a very well-run airline. I mean, I've flown on them countless times. I know them. I know them well. They're a very high-quality airline. So did they fail to invest in crew scheduling software? The evidence says that may be true. But beyond that, I think the Southwest route structure has something to do with it. The magnitude of the storm, put that together with the crew scheduling software issues, and you have, to quote you, the perfect storm.
Yeah, and I think they're the biggest too. I think I've read that as far as passenger airlines are concerned, that also
Domestic.
that also would mean that they're going to be, mathematically involved in more stuff. Well, let me bring this comment up on screen, Captain, because I like to encourage viewers to comment and ask questions when I have guests like you on, because I'm not the brightest bulb in the box. I only come up with so much stuff. This is from Suzanne Murphy. She says, "Isn't it also true colder weather, winter conditions also invite more equipment failures? So, and another reason to be extra cautious in extreme cold weather. Is that true or not?"
It was. It is
Okay.
less true now. Now, I'm going to speak to the airplane itself, and then we can talk about the ground equipment somewhat separately. The airplanes operate in extremely cold temperatures when they're at cruise altitude, 60, 70 below zero. So the airplanes are designed to work well in very cold conditions. It does not mean that, if you leave the airplane outside overnight and it's below zero, that you may not have some anomalies getting it started the next morning. But the newer airplanes are much, much more tolerant than the airliners of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So in that respect, not the equipment failures are not, that I know of, more likely during winter or cold weather operations. Now, the ground equipment, that's something entirely different. Those are the things like the belt loaders, the fuel trucks, and things like that. That also can impact a flight, but it's no more different than your car. That it's more likely to be difficult to start when it's 20 below zero than it is when it's 70. And so the airline operations people at the airports, they either have to leave them running or put them in a warm area or whatever. But yeah, there are more ground equipment failures or problems in cold weather. That's true.
Yeah, I hadn't intended to talk about this, but the best evidence of that historically that I can think of, another one of these horrific crashes that you've covered on air disasters, white planes crashes, programs like this, where we see Air Florida 90, Flight 90, that plane had overnighted. I always thought, now there's some new stuff, new to me anyway, that's coming out. I thought that was just a case of not de-icing properly, but I'm seeing where, again, and you've talked about this, it's usually not just one thing. Almost always there are other factors involved. And I've seen some things like talking about this cold, inclement weather at Reagan National there. The tug couldn't push the plane back, so the guy used the reverse thrusters to help push himself. Shouldn't have done that. He got behind another plane and was in the wash of the plane purposely in front of him to try to blow snow and ice off of him. He shouldn't have done that. And they forgot to turn on the engine deicers maybe first.
That's what killed
him. That's what got him. Yeah.
Yeah.
My God.
I know that accident real well. I had a very, very close friend that was the airplane behind them and watched them literally taxi into position and then take off. One of the things was the pilot experience in cold weather with the Air Florida crew was minimal, and they made some very serious errors. It was a very, very bad day. I was scheduled to fly that day. I was actually in Roanoke, Virginia, which was my crew base at that time. And all over the mid-Atlantic and Northeast, the weather was just awful, but Washington was one of the worst places. So the number of errors that the Air Florida 90 crew made were very significant. And they had problems pushing the airplane back. They mistakenly were trying to use the warm jet exhaust to blow snow and ice off of the airplane. No, you don't do that. If the snow and ice on the airplane, you go get it de-iced. You don't try to utilize, because it refreezes. And so those are the kinds of things that years of experience bring to you. The Air Florida crew didn't have it, but the failure to properly position the engine anti-ice was what caused them to not set sufficient takeoff thrust. And when you did the math on the airplane later, it couldn't fly. There was no way. And the first officer knew something was wrong, didn't know what, but he says repeatedly, "That's not right. That's not right." And the captain doesn't listen to him. And they could have aborted the takeoff and potentially figured out their mistake, but they didn't. And so when the airplane became airborne, it couldn't sustain flight, and it went into the 14th Street Bridge.
And they paid for the mistakes with their lives, so it's hard to be critical. I mean, they didn't want to do it, but by God, they did do it. And then one thing I will say, and we're going to move off this, didn't spend its plan to talk about Air Florida Flight 90, but I've always cited that as the greatest act of heroism that I've ever seen from the passengers. If you look at the video of that, when the plane is in the water and the few passengers that survived are trying to get through that icy water, there's a guy standing on the fuselage of the wing that's passing off the rope, the thing that they passed down to you. He passed that thing off several times to other passengers who were saved. He didn't get out himself, passing it off to other people. And then there was a mid-management, I think an agriculture employee, office worker or something, watching on the bank, watching a woman drown. My God, it is riveting video. That dude just jumps in, saves her life. I mean, and he didn't have to do that. There were rescuers on the scene and they didn't know what to do, couldn't do it. That dude just went in and got her. It is an amazing thing. Air Florida Flight 90, folks. Check that out. Check out the programs that have the captain in it on that. Well, all right. I am getting some other comments here, Susan. She's seen that too. That man was amazing. Let's see. Here's another one. This goes back a ways to what we were talking about. Maybe you can answer this very quickly. I think he's referring to Southwest there. Why couldn't they sort out the luggage quicker, at least, Captain?
That's a question that I think that they're looking at themselves. All the bags are tracked on computer, and once you have twice, 3 times, 4 times the amount of bags, it becomes increasingly difficult to figure out where everything is. This made the case to me to where, and I've done this for a number of years, but I have little Apple AirTags in my bags, and so I know what city they're in, and so that helps. The folks in baggage claim, they're limited by what their computer tells them. And so they're much better today about actually tracking when the bag gets on and off the airplane. I mean, I know when I fly it, and when I check a bag, which is not all that often, but it will tell me, my app will tell me, okay, your bag is loaded on flight 2150, whatever it is. And so at least I know that the bag and I are on the same airplane. Or if it says we're not loaded, then I can call them and go, okay, it made it to Atlanta. It didn't make it out of there. So we can start narrowing it down. And I mean, I think it's probably a good idea, particularly for those of us that travel a lot, to utilize this new technology of these air tags, and that way you can kind of assist the airline in locating your bag.
That's a great tip there, Apple AirTags. And the other thing about it is that you mentioned, I noticed, travel light, folks. I mean, I think I took a European vacation with my with my carry-on. I mean, you don't need to check luggage a lot of times, and you save yourself the grief by just traveling light. Okay, we're running out of time with the captain. I want to bring this up on screen. Which airlines had the most on-time arrivals in 2022? Okay, here's the rankings, and these have been going on for some time. They're not always what they appear to be, but it says which airlines had the most on-time flights. The company ranked 9 other North American airlines in addition to Delta. So Delta was number 1, Alaska Airlines second, followed by United Airlines, American Airlines, Southwest Airlines in 5th. Frontier Airlines came in 6th. JetBlue Airways placed 7th. Allegiant ranked at number 8. WestJet placed 9th, and Air Canada came in last at number 10. Okay, so on this list, Captain, I look at this and Air Canada is a good example. Maybe I'm not looking at the list correctly, but I look at that and I think Air Canada, okay, they're flying in the worst of weather. They might be the most cautious because of weather, and maybe that affects their on-time arrivals. Is that as simple as it gets, or is there more to this list than that?
To some degree, that's true. The geographic location of where most of the flights occur can really skew this on-time ranking. If you have the large airlines, the Deltas, American, Uniteds that fly pretty much all over the world, that's pretty balanced. No matter where the weather is good or bad, they're going to have airplanes operating in and out of it. When you have more geographically constrained operations, I mean, JetBlue, as an example, they work in and out of New York. Well, if the weather moves into New York, it's going to affect virtually every JetBlue flight or throughout the day. So it's a New York weather event, will have a disproportionate effect on JetBlue's on-time performance for that day. So you have to kind of balance it. If you look overall, the air transportation system, notably in the United States, but even worldwide, is amazingly resilient, 1, reliable, 2, and pretty much on time when you consider all the things that they have to work with. So I think that it's everybody wants the airplanes to run on time. One of the things that I've learned, and I try to minimize when I go into a hub, is the real short times there. In other words, a 35 or 40-minute turn. Now, I'd take an hour and a half, 2 hours. That way, if I'm late getting in, I still make my connection and I still get to where I'm going to go. Does it add travel time? Yes. Does it reduce the stress level? Yes. Consequently, whether I'm traveling for business or personal, I try to give myself in the hubs a little bit more time.
All right, we are just about out of time for the show. So these things I wanted to deal with more in depth, but we're going to have to turn them into quick hitters. And this is something that you and I have discussed before. This was an op-ed piece that I saw in the Seattle Times. The FAA is right about excessive pilot dependence on automation. And we've talked about that on this show before, Captain. Quickly, what's your sense or feeling about automation, use of autopilot? And my understanding is that the United States wants pilots to be piloting a little bit more, whereas over in Europe, they're more comfortable with letting the computers have a larger role. Am I accurate in this or not?
Yes. What we've learned over the years is airplanes have become more automated, and the automation has improved in reliability, that more airlines and more regulators initially began to push the maximum use of automation. And I mean, to put it in perspective for you, it was not uncommon, and still is not in some parts of the world, where at 300 or 400 feet, the autopilot's engaged and it's not disengaged until just prior to landing, meaning less than 1,000 feet above the ground. So that doesn't do a lot for the manual flying skills of a pilot. You're commanding the airplane through the autopilot, yes, but the manual flying skills tend to degrade. It's a perishable skill. So they began to push more hand flying, which I'm a big advocate of. And when I was flying the line, I mean, I would routinely hand fly the airplane up to 8 or 10,000 feet and then disengage it 5, 10 miles from the airport just to get and keep my proficiency sharp. But that has now come back in the United States to where they're encouraging that approach to things, where the Europeans have been a little bit slower and are saying that the benefits of automation outweigh the degradation in manual flying skills. And that debate rages over there. I mean, I work a lot with the Royal Aeronautical Society, and that is a raging debate within the flight operations group about how to ensure that manual flying skills are not degraded over time, and do that while maximizing safety. So there's a bit of a different approach between the FAA and EASA, but we need to find the balance, and we have not yet as an industry done that, between manually flying the airplane as much as you can to maximizing the use of automation.
All right, good. And we are almost out of time. I want to get to this because I did promote it, and this is something the captain is extremely familiar with. One of the world's foremost experts on this kind of stuff, remembering the lives lost and lasting legacy on the 20th anniversary of the crash of Flight 5481. What are we talking about, folks? Charlotte, North Carolina, January 8th, 2023. It's the 20th anniversary, that was this week, of the Air Midwest Flight 5481 crash that killed all 21 people on board in Charlotte. This is a day to reflect on those whose lives were taken too soon and the chain of events in the aftermath of the crash that changed the course of aviation safety. On October 8th, 2003, Flight 5481 headed to Greenville, lost control, stalled, and crashed into the ground during takeoff from Charlotte Douglas International Airport. The fact that the cause of the crash was preventable added to the devastation and shock that the families who lost loved ones were experiencing. One family in particular, the Shepherds, who lost their daughter, Christina, in the Flight 5481 crash, decided to channel their grief into action and fight for change. And they got it. Now, this is from WCNC television in Charlotte, this article. That's a photograph of one of the victims. I'm going to bring up just a minute-long film clip here, and I'm going to bring leave your microphone on, Captain, and you kind of describe to us here what we're looking at as this plays, because, again, you know all about this. So here this thing goes.
Yeah, once the airplane took off and they realized that they couldn't maintain control of it, it started back down. It ended up striking a hangar, a U.S. Air hangar there, and very sadly, there were no survivors. It hit the ground pretty hard. The pilots fought for control of an uncontrollable airplane. There had been a maintenance error made, and they did not have sufficient control to be able to stop the nose from coming up. They had flown it down from, I think maybe Charleston, West Virginia, or somewhere up that way. And because they were lightly loaded, the airplane appeared to be normal. But when they fully loaded the airplane with all 19 passengers, the center of gravity was such that they were, as soon as they became airborne, they didn't have sufficient elevator to stop the nose from coming up. And the first officer was a pretty good sized gentleman, and he was pushing forward as absolutely hard as he could, and the nose was still coming up. And at that point, there was the idea that they were going to get the airplane back on the ground. It pretty well went away at that point when they realized it. It was an unflyable and uncontrollable airplane. Very, very, very sad.
And a couple of things were historic about it. It resulted in changes having to do with weight distribution and baggage. Maybe you can talk to that a little bit. But also, most notably, these families and the family of that woman who was in the video clip there and the television report that you saw, they would not step down. They would not cease and desist. They demanded that Midwest Airlines apologize. And that last part of the clip there where you saw the guy under the tent there, that was him apologizing. They got their apology. There was a settlement too financially, but they wanted the airline to admit wrongdoing and apologize for this thing. And that happened. So this was historic on a couple of different fronts, Captain.
It was. I mean, an airline recognizes, particularly in one like this, where an employee of theirs made a major mistake. There's no stepping back from from owning that. And so the small additional step of we're unbelievably sorry this has happened. It was certainly an inadvertent error. It wasn't deliberate. But it was a negligent error, and so that opens an entire legal theory, which goes toward the settlement. But it did change how smaller airplanes calculate weights industry wide, but it affects the smaller airplanes more, and that was a good thing. So, like so many accidents, out of the tragedy comes some industry improvements, and partially that's how we've been able to get the industry as safe as we have.
That's Midwest Flight 5481. Let me see here. I think I'll just put that up. I'll just Donna Crouch says, she said, okay, they're listening. Okay, we're out of time with the captain here. I got to sign off here. Anything that we've covered that you want to recover, Captain, or anything you want to say in closing here as we've put a bow on this edition of Podcast by George?
I think the thing that I would like people to remember is when you have a disruption in your travel schedule, the people that can help you the most are the agents. The pilots and flight attendants can do a little bit, but it's the ground agents, and they're trying to help you. It's frustrating, but please understand and be aware that those ground agents, those pilots, those flight attendants, the maintenance staff, the ground staff, they're not your enemy here, and they want you on your way just as much as you want to go there. So be courteous, listen to them, and help them help you.
Yeah. And don't run up to the counter red-faced and screaming and spit at them while you're yelling at them about problems that they're not in charge of, that you're not likely to get a positive result from that. I never understood why people did that. What the hell? You want this person to help you and you're going to go do that? I mean, that's not going to get you help that you want and need. Well, there you go.
Well, and demanding that they push the airplane back when for legal reasons, safety reasons, and remember that it's the captain's decision overall. You're not going to get very far with, I demand you fly me to New York. That's, I'm sorry, I'll take your input, and we'll get you there when we can, but that's the end of it. You're not going to prevail.
And I'm kind of afraid he paid. I don't know, just me, I guess. But when we got delayed or the flight got canceled because of a weather or a mechanical issue, it's particularly a mechanical issue, I used to sit there and think, whew, man, we dodged a bullet there. I'm glad we didn't take off with a mechanical issue, but other people, let's go. I mean, what the
I remember one lady very, very clearly in Charlotte. There were thunderstorms everywhere, and we were not going to fly through the thunderstorms. And she demanded that we take her immediately and just push the airplane back. And I don't remember where we were going, but I looked at her and I said, ma'am, have you ever been in a thunderstorm? She said, no. And I said, I have. Trust me. You'd be madder at me if I took you into that thunderstorm than not. And she kind of looked at me and said, but I have a meeting. And I said, well, you need to talk to the thunderstorms. And when they move, I'll be glad to fly the airplane.
That's great. And that's a great place to end. Captain, thanks again for coming on Podcast by George.
Always enjoy it, George.
Yeah, I do too. This one in particular. Folks, that's Captain John M. Cox. He's a veteran major airline corporate and general aviation pilot. He's all over TV. He's the analyst, or he provides that commentary for folks like NBC News, and he's been on those shows, Air Disasters and Why Planes Crash. But most importantly for him, he's the Chief Executive Officer of Safety Operating Systems. And there's his Podcast by George live line graphic. Okay, so let me end up here the way that I always do, and that's by encouraging everybody, please, if you're watching right now, sign up, subscribe on Facebook or YouTube so that you're notified of all future episodes of Podcast by George. And ring that notification bell on YouTube. Leave us comments. And by the way, thanks for all the comments on the show today. And if you prefer to just listen to these in audio, as so many people do, sign up on iTunes or the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, places like that. All of that stuff can be found at podcastbygeorge.com. It's all free. Just sign up. But folks, that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast.